Just give a minute for everyone to come. It's looking good so far, Welshie. Time, so that's good. Thanks to everyone for coming today. This is the third in a series of 3 webinars that the CottonInfo and Cotton Australia have put together. And thanks for your attendance at either one or all of them. So this one today is more about the carbon and energy policy. It'll go for about 20 minutes, and it's kind of drawing in all the information that we've heard in the last few webinars. Sorry. And Johnny Welsh is going to be taking care of it. So over to you, Johnny. And yeah, like again, any questions, just please write them on we either go onto the chat side, or there's a section there for questions. Just write your question down and we'll ask them at the end. Okay, thanks, Welshie. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. I hope everyone can hear me. My voice is a little bit croaky this morning, thanks to children bringing home colds and flus. So hopefully you can hear my croaky voice okay, and I'll try not to cough or sneeze into it. But anyway, if we kick off at the moment, Emissions Reduction Fund, part of my core business is to investigate opportunities on behalf of growers to participate in the Emissions Reduction Fund. I have an extension and outreach grant with industry and the Department of Agriculture in Canberra. And this analysis today will focus mainly on broader overarching policy and how that filters down to what's happening on the ground through methods, emissions reduction fund auctions, feasibility that we have done on participating to date, and what's going to occur in the future, areas we are continually looking at as opportunities. So first of all, we do have the Emissions Reduction Fund. We did commence this policy setting with a carbon tax, and the carbon tax was removed from a change of government in September 2013. So a lot of the carbon farming initiative policy was initiated from a different government with a different viewpoint on carbon pricing and incentives to reduce emissions. And the Emissions Reduction Fund is the primary centrepiece for Australia's emissions targets. This does sit alongside other incentives such as the renewable energy target to reduce emissions, and energy efficiency schemes on a state-based level as well, all encompass emissions policy. So the federal government's mission with this policy initiative is to seek out and to distill out the lowest cost carbon abatement in the economy, rather than penalising with a carbon tax. This policy does try and create incentives for businesses to come forward on a voluntary basis and abate carbon at the lowest cost. Australia's abatement challenge is shown here by this graph. So as part of the Kyoto commitment, we do have a responsibility to try and emit back to 2000 levels, or 5% change on 2000 levels. Shown here, if you can just see the cursor, our abatement challenge is 131 megatons of CO2 over this time period. The green line shows the business as usual situation. If we keep heading on now with no changes to our emissions, that's likely where we'll be. There is quite a bit of conjecture and scrutiny over that business as usual scenario at the moment, because essentially that business as usual scenario will determine how big our task is to achieve our abatement. So there's quite a bit of commentary on that from Reputex and other consultants and other analysts in the market at the moment. And some are predicting we will have 120 million tonne success on the Emissions Reduction Fund, slightly short of our target. But once again, that target depends on these business as usual scenarios. So anyone with any more information, certainly the Emissions Reduction Fund or the Department of Environment has these graphs here. You can see the website here on your screen. Looking now, an ERF method. Well, how does the ERF method fit into this policy? Well, The Emissions Reduction Fund has 2.55 billion at the start of the fund to allocate via a series of auctions, and an ERF method is essentially a set of rules for carbon dioxide reduction developed by the Department of the Environment to register to sequester carbon or avoid emissions. So this method, it must be approved for a project to be registered and participate. And additionality is a key component of a method. So you must be doing something that's actually different to what you're actually doing at the moment. So something unique or novel, a change in approach to doing business is what the Department of Environment looked for in developing a method. And these methods are developed using peer-reviewed science and certainly by the UNFCCC's guidelines as to emissions factors. A range of science or global science goes into developing a method. The Emissions Reduction Fund had its first auction results this year on the 15th and 16th of April, and this was a press release put out by the ERF, or the government. So there was 107 contracts awarded. Over 47 million tonnes of CO2 was abated, and we will have a closer look in a moment of where that actual abatement occurred. 144 projects under contract, and the price here for us is what we're really looking for in the cotton industry, what that price per tonne of abatement was, and that's the average price of all the contracts. So we don't actually have transparency on the bell curve itself on what was the highest and lowest prices of those contracts, but they did publish the average price, $13.95 for across all the contracts. The standard contract agreement for an ERF emissions abatement contract is 7 years, but some do extend as far as 10 years or as short as 3 years. Out of the $2.5 billion in the fund, this one auction distributed $660 million in contracts just from this one auction. So looking now, a breakdown of successful projects within the last auction, you can see here 97.5% of projects successful were in the forest sequestration area. So forest sequestration being avoided deforestation or afforestation. So avoided deforestation, I'm not sure how many of you have got contacts in the Western districts around Cobar through that area, but avoided land clearing was a big winner in those areas. Those particular landholders that did have tree clearing permits that had a PVP, which is a property veg plan, were able to go in and apply for carbon offsets, or for they were able to register a project based on avoided deforestation over a long period of time, where the premise being that if they were to not clear or not use those permits, the government would pay them to keep and maintain those vegetation stands. Second of all, the second major beneficiary of the auction was the landfill sector, and most of these projects came from Shire landfill. There's a method involving emissions reduction there, whereby those landfill sites are remediated or in fact filled in or closed down to avoid methane or other harmful greenhouse gas emissions occurring from those sites. And then we have a few smaller registered projects that managed to get up. Soil carbon, 1.1% of the $260 million odd. Savannah burnings featured heavily in the previous carbon farming initiative auctions, which I'll show you later, and pig biogas, also destruction of methane from piggeries, has also previously been successful in participating in the carbon farming initiative projects. They made up 0.4 of the auction results previously. So just to have a look at where the successful projects have been, we've got a map here with little icons showing what sort of projects they were that were successful in registering with government contracts over both policy periods, so the Carbon Farming Initiative policy setting and the latest Emissions Reduction Fund setting over the last 3 years. And you can see savanna burning projects have been very successful. They're characterised by large land areas and quite simple methods, and the carbon abatement in those projects is obviously big enough to be economic for those landholders and land managers. We have a few afforestation projects, tree planting. These brown ones here, these brown icons are landfill gas, so landfill remediation sites there. A few afforestation, and the big winners here have been the afforestation, avoided deforestation projects around Cobar, Western Districts of New South Wales, where landholders can profit from not utilising their clearing permits, basically. So there we see a very dense cluster of projects in that Western Districts of New South Wales. In Western Australia, there's once again a number of landfill remediation sites and afforestation sites. So that's a really good summary of who's been the major beneficiary of these policies in the last 2 to 3 years. And there's really only 2 or 3 different types when you look closely at the history of these projects. Moving on now this is the really relevant pieces for the cotton industry. We're looking at the Department of Environment has been working closely with Cotton Australia and the CRDC on developing a fertiliser use efficiency method in irrigated cotton. And the underlying premise of this is to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, which is actually a powerful greenhouse gas, and to do that through novel or best practice farming techniques to avoid emissions of nitrous oxide fertiliser through fertiliser use efficiency. So the focus of this method is, like I just mentioned, best practice fertiliser use, whereby you can increase your efficiency through either increasing your yield or reducing your applied fertiliser to have a better outcome for your fertiliser, to use less fertiliser or to gain higher yield to reduce your emissions intensity. We have done analysis on this, which I'll go into a bit later on, but just wanted to say the underlying mechanics and fundamentals of this method are very practical and very good, and we did have good engagement with the government on this, and we are satisfied that the pathway to this method is good, but as we'll see a bit later on, there's just a few other things that don't quite line up in the raw economic feasibility of participating. So CottonInfo has done some quite rigorous modelling on growers or landholders or aggregators even participating in the cotton method, and a case study here shows per hectare, if we were to abate or reduce our fertiliser use by, say, 60 to 80 kilos of fertiliser, say reducing your fertiliser use from 280 going back to 220, and you were to abate 1,000 kilos of CO2, which is 1 tonne of CO2 per hectare, your revenue for that hectare would be $13.95. So spread over 1,000 hectares in that one given year, that would be your project revenue for 1,000 hectares of cotton. 7-year project revenue, almost $100,000 per 1,000 hectare of cotton. So your cost area to participate in this emissions reduction fund under this method: registration fees, setup, legal costs, is not a linear relationship. It's a flat rate, and we're working on $6,000 for 1,000 hectares of cotton for a 7-year project. Project verification, again, a flat rate just to have the project verified. And then the hefty admin comes in with an offset report. Now, these to have your project administration satisfy the Clean Energy Regulator, those costs have to be carried out by a registered third-party auditor, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, and there are a range, or that's one example, or Ernst & Young are also accredited. So they have to come out, go through your financial records, or they have to be satisfied with the 7-year history on your farm, and then the practices you've done since then participating in the method warrant a clearance in your offset report. Now, this is where the administration has become very costly, and streamlining this process from the surveys that we've done through a range of intermediaries shows that the method is actually quite scientific and is not as simple as some of the other methods in the emissions reduction fund, which kind of puts a drag on the economics. Well, obviously it does, by the size of the magnitude of the costs of administration here. So we've taken a kind of a best and a worst case scenario here with admin. We have a range per landholder for these audits of per $10,000 up to $40,000 for an audit, depending on what shape the audit and the distance from capital cities, etc. per landholder that's going to cost. We had a wide range, so we've extrapolated the range over 3 audits for a 7-year project every second year, from $30,000 to $120,000 potentially in audit costs. So we've got a revenue here of roughly $100,000, and our audit costs can be as high as those. This case study does not include the reduced cost of ends from going from 280 to 220, for example. So that has not been factored, and that's defined as a co-benefit, which has not been included here. So that's just an initial case study in the current environment. We are anticipating that these administrative requirements are being looked at heavily by commercial intermediaries, and we think that as this concept progresses, those costs will come down. But we are trying hard to work with the Department of Environment to establish a pilot whereby we can ground truth landholders in a case study to document exactly what it's going to cost to participate. Other land sector methods applicable to cotton growers, well, we do have the obvious one is afforestation. Planting trees in western areas from a practical viewpoint is quite a risky concept. They have tried large-scale tree plantings in the past, and unless climatic conditions are favourable, the risk to the landholder, unless they're irrigated, can be significant. And anyway, this is the obvious other land sector method available to growers. The Australian Farm Institute has done benefit cost analysis on this exact scenario, and their analysis came back with, in order to cover costs, we need a carbon dioxide ERF price to be above $35 a tonne. So, and that analysis, of course, doesn't include biodiversity values such as reduced soil erosion, beneficial pests, etc., that come with increased biodiversity, groundwater improvement. Anyway, there's a link there to that method on afforestation. What you've got to do, it is a very capital intensive method whereby the landholder takes lots of upfront risk to outlay $3,000 or $4,000 a hectare to establish those trees, even before he or she has received any revenue. So agriculture in the ERF to date, participation is of course voluntary. This is not a mandatory participation. Growers are free to view and to look at potentially participating in parallel with what they're doing in their own business. Broadacre agriculture has had limited opportunities to date, particularly for large tracts of dryland farming. There really is the soil carbon method available, and really not a whole lot of others to date where growers can participate on on a large scale that really add up just at this stage. But once again, the Department of Environment are working with farmer interest groups and industries to think of more ways that we can access the pot of 2.55 billion over the next few years. So in short, at this very point in time, successful projects really do need scale and simplicity to compete at the ERF auction or to aggregate, just in order to make projects bigger so they can dwarf their administration costs in these projects. Project aggregation, that is an alternative. Groups of growers getting together to register a project over a range of different methods can be done. This is whereby you would hire a project manager, an intermediary to run the admin and marketing of carbon on your farms. This is certainly one way of participating for growers if they're interested, and the government has actually released quite a deal of extension material on aggregation. If you wanted to Google ERF project aggregation, there are a range of case studies on how landholders can participate. In some cases, third-party project proponents will take an equity in a project for, say, 30 to 40%, whereby they will stand side by side with the grower or the landholder to get a method through, and for that equity they will do all the administration and all the audit processes, which can be an option. So for more information, there's a couple of sources there to refer to. So things to watch in carbon markets going forward: upcoming emissions reduction fund auctions. There is lots of speculation with analysts at the moment. Will the CO2 price be higher or lower? That's debatable. So I guess what we can do is watch to see whether there'll be more upward pressure on that price. It does have to move a fair way at this stage, as do audit costs in opposing directions to make the economics work for our sector. But the government is actually trying to seek out, with taxpayer money, the lowest cost carbon abatements. So it will be interesting to see how many of remaining afforestation, avoided deforestation and landfill projects there are out there that can compete before the more expensive projects, such as those in agriculture, can come forward. So the UNFCCC's post-2020 targets, I know that Cotton Australia's has been in close communications with the NFF on our commitment to post-2020 targets with every other agricultural sector and what they would like to see in the policy going forward, and certainly we'll be extending on those submissions to the NFF. The development of the secondary carbon markets. Now this could be a secret shining light because there are individual proponents such as BHP or Qantas operating in a secondary market under these methods, whereby the government is not the only proponent selling carbon or purchasing carbon abatement. Some big companies and global companies are looking directly to landholders and aggregators to purchase carbon abatement, and that market was at about $17 or $18 per tonne of CO2 on those secondary markets. And anecdotally, we're hearing that market, can be another good source of competing or accessing ancillary revenue to farming. ERF method audit costs are significant at the moment, and what we really need to do is to see whether we can get the project auditors to see whether they can reduce their cost and streamline their costs. But the underlying, responsibility of auditing a method is that most of these methods are quite complex, which does involve time, does involve historical records, and it does involve administration. So that's one of the difficulties we face. I think the key there is to try and develop a method that's streamlined. And potentially one of those methods could involve using nitrification inhibitors, so coated urea products. We're hoping we can get one of those methods up in the coming years and growers can participate in those just for using a simple fertiliser product. A basic overview now, just to start to wind up the presentation today. Limited participation from broadacre farming to date. Basically, the abatement, the cost of abatement in the agriculture sector is just not large scale enough to compete with other projects at the moment at auction. And the benefit cost analysis on the cotton nitrogen method at this point in time is just not adding up to participate, particularly given the large amount of time and upfront cost and risk the landholder and a project proponent would have to bear in order to get a project to market and then participate in that market is taking a lot of the upfront risk. Unlike the renewable energy target where purchasing solar panels you do get an upfront capital subsidy at the point of purchase, the emissions reduction fund works on you getting paid once you've satisfied a range of criteria, which essentially has left the project, the person or the entity trying to get that project up, has left them squarely with the risk to get the project off the ground. So, and the development of secondary markets, certainly that's one we are keeping in a close eye on, creating opportunities going forward. The emissions reduction fund obviously has got some money, 2.55 billion, and where we head after that will depend on domestic policy and international commitments as well. But all those things aside, the cotton industry is doing a range of things in sustainability, not necessarily having to compete or participate in the ERF. And references here, the Sustainability Report 2014 has been released in the last few months. Cotton Leads and the Better Cotton Initiative are also putting the industry, showcasing the industry on their sustainability credentials as well. For more information, this is put together by myself and a colleague in Cotton Australia, Angela Bradburn, who's the policy officer at Cotton Australia in Sydney. So any detailed policy analysis queries should be directed towards Angela, and she just couldn't make it today to moderate today's session, or myself. And there's certainly a range of other researchers, including economists, life cycle assessment researchers, and NRM tech specialists on our team. And certainly call us, make us your first port of call if you're interested in a project, because we have done a lot of work over quite a diverse range of policy and ERF topics. So our details are there, and back to you, Jeff.
Right, thanks, Johnny. That was very interesting. So just to confirm, with those audit costs, we need, on a 7-year project, we need 3 audits, and best case is 10,000 each, is it?
10,000 per landholder. That's we did a very wide survey. We had so we had auditors and aggregators look at the cotton method and kind of give us a feel for how complex they thought the audit might be. And some auditors said, this is going to cost a lot of money per landholder per audit, and they couldn't exactly put a figure on it, but there was a wide range there which basically make or breaks the project economics very quickly.
Yeah, right.
So that is clear.
And so it was 3 audits, was it? 3 audits over 7 years.
An audit, there's an audit required every 2 years before the regulator will issue money on that abatement contract.
Yeah, right. And just talking about soil carbon, I mean, there was some projects that were funded. Were they not, broadacre farming projects, or?
I assume they were. I haven't actually had a detailed look at the soil carbon method.
Yep. That's
certainly one that we need to keep an eye on. But carbon is by virtue very volatile in the soil. Like it is mobile and can turn to CO2. That's a difficult one. Once again, unless you're doing over a very, very large area at $10 a tonne or $13.95 a tonne, it does require a big critical mass to dwarf those administration costs at this stage.
Righto. Okay, so anyone's got a question, put your hand up. I have got one question from Ben, so either write it in the questions pane or put your hand up, and I'll come to you. So Ben's question to you, Johnny, is regarding nitrogen fertiliser use efficiency in cotton farming. How would this be measured? Surely cotton farmers are already working as efficiently as possible to maximise yields with a minimum input. Therefore, how would improvements be benchmarked?
That's a really good question. For the operators operating by best practice or close to already, for them to produce 7 years of fertiliser use efficiency data, it's going to be really hard for them to say, okay, we can improve after this 7 years going forward. So it's probably, the method is more targeting the laggards of best management practice to see that they can improve. But yeah, there are some, there are meant to be some additionality that you can do differently. I'm not sure exactly what those are, but it is very much geared towards the back end of the bell curve to try and bring them forward. And yes, there isn't a whole lot someone doing best practice already can do to improve their benchmark.
But further to that, Johnny, doesn't the government need to have a benchmark, because how are they going to pick a level like at 280 units and 12 bales? They'll say we're happy, but if you reduce your level of nitrogen from there, we'll give you 1 tonne of carbon credits. Like, how don't they have to have a benchmark or some figure in their mind below which you can get some credits?
Yeah, they do, and they've actually published a cotton nitrogen method calculator whereby you can go online and put in your rate and your yield, and that will give you an abatement figure for that year.
Yeah.
So this is quite a tricky method where obviously you get a year like this year where January's kind, you don't get a lot of fruit drop, your nitrogen efficiency looks fantastic because the yields are great on the same levels of N. And that can obviously work against you inversely of having a really hot January or a hot February, the plant struggling under hot conditions and yield being compromised on the same or higher levels of N, which does bring in project risk. How that's actually accounted, there is a level of tolerance with abatement, but also if you don't abate and you promise to abate, well, it's a contract and you have to make good on that contract if you don't reach that level of abatement that you've promised. So once again, that's a project risk that kind of we didn't look at in too much detail given the size of the audit costs, assuming that the audit costs were that high and that the front end effort to get a project registered and verified, that kind of there wouldn't be a whole lot of incentive for growers to go down that path in the first instance.
Okay. Right, now we've got a question from the floor. Alice, I think I've unmuted you, so fire away.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hear you well.
Okay. John, there's some talk amongst the dryland cotton circles about, with Vulgar 3 coming in and the new proposed RMP reducing, and in some cases, removing the need to pupae bust, that there's a thought that might be an opportunity under the soil carbon method, but then that is an additional, it meets the additional requirement because previously they would have undertaken that tillage and they won't in the future. Is that something that the industry's looked at and thought about, or is that something that could be possible?
It's not, and probably in short at this stage, at $13.95 a tonne, Alice, it's really difficult to make the project's economics work with the administration burden on a farm scale.
Yeah.
The farm scale has to be really big to make the project economics work. The pupae busting one could potentially be, it could be an alternative. Sequestration projects such as afforestation or soil carbon do carry a few red flags because the sequestration is tied to the land and it's an encumbrance on the land. If you have any existing financial encumbrance on that farm, the bank or the financier can veto a soil carbon sequestration method if they like, and that has been done so already. So in short, sequestration projects do carry that extra risk whereby a financier can say, we don't want you to do this. This is more admin. We've got an encumbrance on the farm. So that's another layer of complexity that growers have to consider when they're registering a sequestration project of any kind, where it will be a caveat or an encumbrance on the land.
Okay. Because, yeah, I've heard that there are aggregators out there that are looking into the, with Bulgard 3, whether that's a possibility. And
yeah, well, I guess that's something we should.
Is out there.
Yeah, that's probably something I'll get a few of us on board just to run some modelling numbers on, Alice, to see how big an area you will need to store that, and just how complex that method is. In terms of auditing and how much carbon you can actually store in the ground, as to whether you can make it viable or not. That's certainly that's a good point.
Okay, is there any other questions? Ben, I have just seen your comment, really, so projects would only be open to poor performers. I think you did say that that's probably the case, Johnny, so I think you've answered that question, Ben, so just, if he hasn't, just make another comment.
Well, yeah, I mean, the method is, okay, what's your 7 years of nitrogen use efficiency data, and any improvements you make on that, we will pay you abatement credits for that. So that's the underlying principle of the cotton nitrogen method. And if you can improve on already best practice, well, that's terrific. But if you can't make gains on where you have been historically, you will struggle to make a case for abatement.
Yeah, it just intrigues me though, Johnny, what is best practice? I mean, we've been tossing that question around for a couple of years. It just makes you wonder how they set that benchmark of, right, this is best practice, above or below that, you're either, you're not efficient. I'm intrigued, but anyway. Yeah,
well, the Department of the Environment have put together an Excel calculator which they've made into a program. So the best thing I can do, Ben, is send you the link so you can have a look in that calculator, run some scenarios in that calculator. But yeah, we just found that even a 60 to 80 kilogram change in efficiency of fertiliser, that's reduction, just to get the farm scale into a window of critical mass was very difficult. And of course, yeah, we're revisiting these numbers after every auction and revisiting audit costs, but to compete with savanna burning, avoided deforestation and landfill in an auction is a long way off for us, to be frank. It's a long way off for the cotton industry at this stage. And I guess, yeah, it's a matter of looking at this Bulgard 3 sequestration opportunity and running some numbers there as well.
Okay. And the only other question I had, Johnny, was, why the business as usual on that first graph you showed had a marked increase, around 2008, I think, or 2010, and flatlining before that. I mean, can you comment on why that is? I would have thought a steady increase over time would be more realistic than that. just wondering why it went up so quickly.
A lot of it was to do with the economy. 2007 and 8 was when the GFC was on, and then the mineral resources boom and expansion in China. I'm not really an emissions expert on that, but that's the business as usual scenario that the government's come up with. But yeah, there's certainly a steep trajectory there, isn't there?
Well, it just seems like a strange, it's all flatlining all the way. It's actually up to 2014, really, and then for some reason now it's going to be markedly higher than it was last year. I don't quite understand why that is, but anyway, that's probably neither here nor there. Okay, so we've slowed down a bit on the questions. Has anyone got a question or put your hand up? Have we answered everything? Howie Hingham. Here's one from Andrew Bullard. Can I receive the PowerPoint in email? What do you do with the PowerPoint after this, Johnny?
Yeah, sure. I can. Andrew, if you can send me, I can either email you the Prezi in its current form, or I can put it into a PDF, whichever one would suit.
Great. Okay. I'm just checking now. It doesn't look like there's any more questions, so thanks everyone for coming. Johnny's always available, so give him a ring or an email if you want to find out anything more, and we'll do this again. Was there anything else I had to add, Johnny?
No, that's it, Jeff. We will be running another series of webinars roughly this time next year, rerunning the nutrition webinars plus a policy update in another 12 months, just to cover off on progress, recent developments in carbon markets and policy. So yeah, we will be running another one in 12 months.
Great.
Thanks.
Righto. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll log off now and we'll talk to you again. Righto. Thanks,
Jeff.